In the saturated heat of a Washington summer, a deadline hangs in the air, not for infrastructure bills or campaign announcements, but for peace. The clock began ticking 2 weeks ago when U.S. President Donald Trump made a dramatic proclamation. Russia has 50 days to agree to a peace deal or face what he called severe tariffs. That ultimatum, delivered amid intensifying violence in Ukraine, has sent shockwaves through diplomatic circles and drawn sharp scrutiny both at home and abroad. On July 26th, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio sat before the Fox News cameras and laid bare the administration's growing frustrations. The ultimate closer, he called Trump, a term borrowed from business where last-minute persuasion translates to profit. But this time, the stakes are higher than any deal inked in a Manhattan boardroom. This is about halting a war, or at least forcing its trajectory. Rubio's appearance was more than spin. It marked a shift in tone from strategic ambiguity to pointed impatience. Trump is losing his patience, he said bluntly, referring to the president's interactions with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Despite having very good interactions and phone calls, it never leads to anything. So, the time has come for some action. Beneath his words ran a current of exasperation, a sense that the diplomatic theater has yielded little more than a growing death toll in Ukraine. Since the 50-day ultimatum was issued, Russia has accelerated its offensive. The war-torn cities of Kharkiv and Odessa continue to suffer under relentless missile strikes, and the front line pushes westward, shredding any illusion that the deadline was deterrent enough to stall Kremlin aggression. Instead, the announcement has ignited a firestorm of criticism. Observers argue that the ultimatum gives Moscow nearly 2 months of leeway, a window to kill, conquer, and consolidate before consequences kick in. The tariffs themselves, set at roughly 100%, have raised eyebrows for their modesty. In the halls of Congress, a bipartisan coalition had already proposed more aggressive penalties, including 500% rates targeting nations that purchase Russian oil. Critics say Trump's plan falls short, handing the Kremlin breathing room rather than pressure. But if Russia remains defiant, China lurks as the quiet enabler. Rubio didn't mince words on Beijing's role, accusing Chinese leadership of giving Russia as much aid as they can get away with without being discovered. It's a clandestine alliance, framed by plausible deniability and cloaked in trade deals. Intelligence leaks have painted an alarming portrait, Chinese components surfacing in Russian attack drones, sanctions circumvented by shell companies and shadow banks, oil purchases masked beneath diplomatic smiles. There's no way Putin could have sustained this war without Chinese support, Rubio stated flatly. That claim, once speculative, now finds grim affirmation in battlefield debris. Ukrainian engineers examining downed drones are discovering microchips and guidance systems sourced from Chinese manufacturers. Supply routes, once murky, are now documented through investigative reporting and satellite data. The geopolitical triangle that binds Moscow, Beijing, and Tehran is no longer theoretical, it's active. Early July saw Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in Beijing, shaking hands with Chinese President Xi Jinping. Their dialogue, steeped in euphemism, was a celebration of strategic unity. Xi hailed the partnership as a model for a new type of international relations. To American ears, the phrase rings ominously. China insists it maintains neutrality in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. It abstains from sending troops, keeps diplomatic rhetoric balanced, and refuses formal military alliances. But neutrality, it seems, does not preclude economic lifelines. Through oil purchases, export of dual-use technology, and backdoor banking, Beijing has become indispensable to the Russian war effort. Ukrainian officials, exasperated by the double game, have quietly begun lobbying Western leaders to widen the scope of sanctions, targeting not just Russia, but its patrons. And while Beijing gains leverage, Washington faces distraction. Rubio warned that China benefits from the war dragging on, a prolonged conflict that saps Western focus and resources. Iran, meanwhile, provides weapons to Russia, completing the triangle: oil from China, drones from Iran, soldiers from Russia. It's a coalition without formal charters or shared ideology, but one bound by opportunism and defiance. Inside the Oval Office, Trump reportedly remains fixated on closing the deal he says he inherited from the Biden administration. The framing is political, but the war is anything but. As deadlines approach and promises thicken, the shelling continues. For Ukrainians, there is no pause. There is only survival. As the countdown marches forward, the world will soon learn whether this ultimatum is the start of a turning point or the prelude to escalation. Whether tariffs can cripple an economy already buoyed by Beijing's lifeline, or whether diplomacy can survive when its participants speak in ultimatums and encrypted supply chains. For now, the war in Ukraine rages on, deadlines loom, drones fly, and a trio of powers shapes the future, not in press releases, but in fire.